Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to build the wrong life. That's not how it happens. The dangerous version is quieter. Everything feels normal, reasonable, responsible, until one day you look around and realize you've been moving in a direction you never chose. That moment doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with an alarm. It arrives in a parking lot, or a Tuesday morning before work, or in the middle of a conversation you've had 100 times before, and suddenly, something is different. Not the world around you, something inside the way you're seeing it. You realize the path you're standing on didn't begin where you thought it did. You realize it's been going somewhere for a long time, and you never noticed you were on it. Think about the last time you made a decision that felt completely reasonable. Maybe it was a subscription, something small, something that just made sense at the time. Maybe it was an upgrade, a slightly nicer apartment, a car that cost a little more than the previous one, but nothing dramatic, nothing you couldn't justify. Maybe it was staying in a role because the timing wasn't right to leave, because you had just gotten a raise, because the market felt uncertain, because next year would be better, because the kids were in school, because your partner was in the middle of something, because there was always a reason that made leaving feel irresponsible. Every one of those decisions felt fine, not reckless, not careless, not something you'd have to explain to anyone. You would have defended each one, and you would have been right. Each decision, on its own, made sense. That's not the problem. The problem is something else entirely. The human brain is built for evaluation. You evaluate the thing in front of you. Is this safe? Is this reasonable? Does this make sense for who I am right now? If the answer is yes, you proceed. If the answer is no, you stop. This works. For most of human history, this worked, but it creates a blind spot that most people never identify. When you evaluate a decision, you evaluate the decision. You almost never evaluate what that decision is doing to your direction. The decision feels reasonable. The direction it creates is invisible, and directions, unlike decisions, don't announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, without asking for your attention, without triggering any alarm. Here is what accumulation looks like from the inside. You take a job that pays more than the last one. That's a reasonable decision. You adjust your spending to your new income. That's a reasonable decision. A year later, the job that paid more now feels like the minimum you could accept. That's not a decision you made. That's a direction you didn't notice forming. You move into a neighborhood that matches where you are now. That's a reasonable decision. Your reference points shift. What looked comfortable a year ago now looks like falling behind. That's not a decision you made. That's a direction that was forming while you were making reasonable decisions. You get used to a level of ease, convenience, the small things that remove friction from your day, each one reasonable, each one affordable, and slowly, without a single bad decision, your life builds a floor you didn't choose, a floor that now feels like survival. You're not making choices anymore. You're maintaining a position you accumulated into. And the thing that makes this so hard to see is that maintaining feels like choosing. From the inside, there's no difference. You're still making decisions every day, still evaluating, still adjusting, still doing what makes sense given where you are. It never stops feeling like agency. That's exactly why the direction stays invisible. There's something important about what normal does to perception. When you first started making a certain amount, you remembered what less felt like. You had a reference point. The new number was the new number, and you knew it was new. But after a year, the reference point moved. The new number became the number, not a gain, not progress, just what things cost now. And then that became the floor to defend. And then a new number came, and the same thing happened. And at no point did you decide to build your life around a number that would take a certain amount of maintenance. But that's exactly what happened, not through carelessness, through the ordinary process of decisions becoming normal, becoming baseline, becoming the minimum, acceptable condition of your life. That process runs in the background. It doesn't interrupt anything. It doesn't require your awareness to operate. It just runs. And the direction it creates is one you only see when you're far enough away from the beginning to finally see the line. Most people think the dangerous decisions are obvious. They imagine a moment of weakness, a clear mistake, a thing they'll recognize as wrong when it happens. This is why the real pattern survives, because it doesn't look like a mistake. It looks like Tuesday. It looks like a normal evening where you ordered what you usually order, went to bed when you usually go to bed, thought about what you usually think about. Nobody flags Tuesday as the problem. Tuesday feels like everything is fine. But enough Tuesdays in a row and you have a month, and enough months in a row and you have a year, and enough years in a row and you have a life. And at some point you look at the life you have and realize it wasn't built from decisions. It was built from Tuesdays, from the accumulation of what felt normal, from the direction created by everything you never thought to question, because none of it felt like a question. It just felt like life. There's a version of this that happens in careers. You didn't choose a trajectory. You chose a next step. The next step felt right. It paid more. It matched your experience. It made sense for where you were. The step after that made sense too. And the step after that, until, at some point, you realized you were somewhere you would never have chosen from the beginning. Not bad, necessarily. Not a disaster. Just not the place you would have pointed to if someone had asked you at 22 where you wanted to end up. And nobody did anything wrong. Your employer didn't trick you. The path didn't lie to you. You just kept choosing the reasonable next step without ever stepping back to ask where the steps were collectively pointing. That's the version that stays invisible the longest. Because each step felt like a choice. And it was. But the direction was never chosen. It formed from the aggregate of every reasonable move you made while looking at the move and not the movement. There's a version of this that happens with how you spend your time. Not the dramatic waste. Not the obvious distraction. The quiet version, where your days have a shape that you fell into gradually and now maintain without thinking. The hour at the end of the night that became 2 hours, that became the thing you do now. The habit of checking something that turned into a reflex, that turned into the background noise of your attention. The weekend pattern that solidified over years into the thing you don't question, because it's just how your weekends go. None of it was designed. All of it was accumulated. And the accumulated shape of your time creates the accumulated shape of your life, just as surely as the accumulated shape of your money. You were never allocating time. You were just getting through days. And the days were quietly building something you didn't review. There's a version of this that happens with identity. You have a self-image that formed during a particular period of your life. A period when money was tighter, when options were fewer, when what you could do and what you couldn't do was clearer. And even after that period ended, the self-image stayed. You still navigate like someone who has to be careful. You still feel a low-level vigilance that doesn't match your actual situation. You still think of certain things as not for you, not consciously, not as a decision, just as the background operating assumption of how you move through the world. The world changed. The self-image didn't get the update. And so you have a person making current decisions from a set of internal rules that were built for a different situation. And the direction those rules create is not the direction your actual life requires. But it feels like you. It feels like just who you are. That's the version that's hardest to see, because it doesn't feel like a direction at all. It just feels like personality. Think about the moments you felt financially behind. Not because anything went wrong, just the feeling of looking around at what you have versus what you thought you'd have, and not being able to explain the gap. You made decent decisions. You worked. You didn't take dramatic risks. And still, there's a space between the life you're maintaining and the life you thought you were building toward. That space is usually not the result of one decision. It's the result of a direction you were on for years that no single decision revealed. It's the accumulation of the reasonable. It's the cost of evaluating each move carefully while the movement itself was never examined. Not because you weren't paying attention, because you were paying attention to exactly the wrong scale. You were watching the individual move. The pattern was forming at a scale you weren't looking at. And patterns at that scale don't make themselves known until enough time has passed that you can finally see the shape of them. By then, the shape is already your life. Here is what the delayed awareness feels like when it finally arrives. It's not dramatic. It doesn't feel like a revelation. It feels more like exhaustion with a question attached. The question is usually some version of, how did I get here? Not here as in a disaster. Here as in, this specific version of my life that I'm working very hard to maintain, and that I can trace back to reasonable decisions, but that I wouldn't have built if I'd been asked to design it from scratch. That's the moment the direction becomes visible, when the destination is clear enough that you can finally trace the path backward, And what you find when you trace it backward is not a mistake. What you find is a series of moments where you evaluated the immediate choice and missed the accumulated direction. You chose the decision. You didn't choose the destination, but you arrived there anyway. And you can follow the path from that destination all the way back to the beginning and find nothing that looks wrong. Just reasonable steps. Just adjustments that made sense. Just a person trying to do the right thing at each individual moment. The destination wasn't built by failure. It was built by the accumulation of ordinary. That's what makes this the one that persists. Not the dramatic mistake, not the obvious wrong turn, the quiet accumulation of the reasonable, the direction you were always building while you were focused on doing the next right thing. The brain registers decisions. It doesn't register trajectories. You were making decisions the whole time. The trajectory was forming in the background, and the background doesn't come with alerts. It doesn't interrupt your evaluation of the step in front of you to show you where the steps are collectively going. It just records. It just accumulates. It just builds the direction from whatever you put into it, regardless of whether you were watching. And one day you look up and you're somewhere you didn't choose. And the hardest part isn't being there. The hardest part is realizing that nothing felt wrong while it was happening. Everything felt normal. That's what makes this the one that survives. The pattern doesn't look like a pattern while it's running. It looks like your life. You thought you were choosing it. You were accumulating it. And most of the accumulation was finished before you thought to look. There's one more thing about the delayed awareness. It comes with a particular kind of disorientation, because the moment you see the direction clearly, you also see that you were the one walking it, not trapped, not pushed. Walking, making reasonable decisions, doing sensible things, taking care of what was in front of you, and all of that accumulated into this. And the disorientation comes from both truths being true at once. You were doing it right, and this is still where it led. That's the part that doesn't resolve easily, because you can't look back and find the decision to undo. You can only look at the full arc, at the distance between where you started and where the accumulated reasonable eventually delivered you, and understand, maybe for the first time, that direction and decision are different things, that you can make 1,000 good decisions and still build a direction you never would have chosen. That evaluation and navigation are not the same skill. That being good at one doesn't automatically make you good at the other. That the path you're on right now is being built by everything you're not questioning, because none of it feels like a question. Just life. Just Tuesday. Just the reasonable accumulation of a person trying to get it right. And the direction is forming anyway, one step at a time, whether you're watching or not.